Let's bow in. So welcome everyone to the Buddhist Path of Awakening course. We are working our way through the profound treasury of the ocean of Dharma by Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, the title of which is a bit of a joke or a pun because his name was Chogyam, which means in Tibetan ocean of Dharma. So this is his profound treasury. And the profound treasury, every year Trungpa Rinpoche, for about, I think it was 15 years, took away a group of students, anywhere from 150 to 250, for a 3-month retreat in various places, usually picking resort areas in the fall because they would be inexpensive. And in those times, there would be a lot of practice. In fact, there would be alternating periods of practice and study. And during the practice periods, there would just be practice all day long, like a weekton or a daton. And then it would alternate with periods of study in which there would be maybe 3 periods of practice a day, and then classes, including Trungpa Rinpoche teaching at night. And the 3 months were divided up into the first month, he covered Hinayana teachings, the teachings of the foundational vehicle of Tibetan Buddhism. In the second month, he covered Mahayana teachings of the greater vehicle of Tibetan Buddhism. And in the third month, he covered Vajrayana teachings, the adamantine vehicle of Tibetan Buddhism. These teachings have been digested into 3 volumes, and we have been working our way through them. We are currently on volume 3, which is called The Tantric Path of Indestructible Wakefulness. And tonight, Michael is going to teach chapter 4 of that work. So, Michael.
Thank you. And as John said, welcome to everyone. I'd like to begin with a quote that I received this week because I think it points to something related to this chapter. Basically, it's a quote from Trungpa Rinpoche's book, Crazy Wisdom, but it has to do with the nature of study, which is what we're doing. I hope that makes the sound better. Basically, it's from Crazy Wisdom, and what he says in relation to study is if the proper idea of intellectual understanding and sharpening the intellect is not feeding oneself millions of bits of information and making oneself into a walking library, then what is it? It is connected with developing sharpness and precision in relating with the nature of reality. This has nothing to do with dwelling on logical conclusions or concepts. One doesn't try to come to conclusions. The purpose of study, rather than to come to conclusions, is to experience things logically and sensibly. This seems to be the middle way between rejecting the intellect and emphasizing it exclusively. So the key sentences in this is that our study is meant to do exactly what he says. It's connected with developing sharpness and precision in relating with reality. And that the purpose of study, rather than come to any particular conclusion, is to experience things logically and sensibly. And so in this chapter, which is titled Uncovering Indestructible Goodness and Wakefulness, what Trungpa Rinpoche is pointing out to us, as we've had all along, is something about our nature, who we are, what we are, from the point of view of the Vajrayana. In some of the chapters we've read in the previous weeks, we've covered a couple of ideas, I think, that are kind of central to the difference between the Vajrayana and the Mahayana, particularly when Trungpa Rinpoche says that that when the Mahayana talks about Buddha nature, it's presented as an embryonic kind of a thing, whereas in the Vajrayana, we actually are fully realized Buddhas, or we have within us the capability of fully realized Buddhahood. And when there are obstacles and confusions and whatever kinds of obscurations might come up, that from the point of view of the Vajrayana, they're seen as temporary. Oftentimes in traditional teachings, they'll use the word adventitious, meaning that they're not inherent to who we are, but they're kind of what covers over or obscures who or what we are. So that's why the title of this chapter includes the word uncovering. It's actually fairly significant that through our practice and study, we come to realize that our ordinary confused perceptions of ourselves cover over our indestructible goodness and wakefulness. And this is presented to us in various ways in the Hinayana and Mahayana teachings, but it becomes very, very clear in the Vajrayana teachings. And one aspect of the Vajrayana teachings actually is the importance of simplicity, which we'll come to when we talk about Samantabhadra, which is in the middle of this chapter. But that basically the practice on the Vajrayana level and the understanding on the Vajrayana level in its finest form is actually a practice of complete simplicity. And in fact, our practice of meditation is an expression of that simplicity. That when we do meditation practice, such as many of us did in the previous half hour, that we're not trying to add anything to our experience. We're not trying to remove anything from our experience. We're simply trying to settle into what we are aware of in the present moment without adding anything to that and without trying to take anything away from that. And this is actually presented even from the Hinayana. And toward the end of the chapter, Trungpa Rinpoche talks about the Hinayana in relation to the Vajrayana. And again, the importance of understanding the utter simplicity of what we're asked to do. When we're able to settle in meditation practice, when we're able to let go of, relax any kind of struggle, any kind of effort to make ourselves or the world around us any different from what it just simply is, we come to see something different in terms of our who we are, what we are. We come to know something about our true nature. And for this reason, or to help us do this, actually, a lot of the teachings are aimed at helping us recognize something about the nature of who we are, the nature of our awareness, the nature of that experience. And this begins in a very simple way in meditation practice, when we just simply learn to recognize the difference between being present as opposed to being distracted. And even the very first time that we sit, we might recognize very clearly that there's a significant difference in our experience when we're present, as opposed to when we're caught up in thought, absorbed in thoughts and feelings, distracted and mindless. And that when we're capable of, again, just simply allowing ourselves to settle or relax into present experience, that our experience of ourselves and our experience of the world is very different. And as we go along through the Hinayana, the Mahayana, and the Vajrayana, we come more and more to recognize that experience and recognize the significance of that experience. In particular, in the Mahayana, and again, even more so in the Vajrayana, we come to realize that this experience of being present, the experience of being awake, the experience of being aware, is actually fundamentally intrinsic to who we are. That we might begin by thinking that we have awareness or we have Buddha nature, but at some point we come to recognize more and more that in fact we are awareness, we are Buddha nature. In other words, through repeated practice, regular practice, we come more and more to identify with our awake qualities. And we experience some kind of stabilization of being awake and some kind of realization as well. Come to appreciate the simplicity and the importance of simply being in the present moment. So with that in mind, begin with the chapter, Uncovering Indestructible Goodness and Wakefulness. In the beginning, Trungpa Rinpoche says, in the Vajrayana, we make a certain discovery, the discovery of Buddha nature. And once we discover such a thing, and we can think of this as just discovering, again, our awake nature, our intrinsic nature, our inherent nature, Once we discover such a thing, we find that there are a great many possibilities, particularly in following the path. And there are many reasons you could give for why we might begin to see that there are a great many possibilities. But just as a beginning to contemplate what that means, even before we go further, that through the practice of meditation and through our study, we become increasingly free of fixed mind, that we come to realize that oftentimes we find ourselves stuck in points of view, stuck in our opinions, stuck in our beliefs in ego, who we think we are. And that through the practice of meditation, we become increasingly free of fixed mind. We become increasingly free of mind that's filled with preconceptions and opinions and expectations, and instead become open to our world and become open to ourselves and open to our experience. And again, as we settle, our perception, for that reason, our perception becomes clearer and clearer. And we begin to recognize that the world around us is actually quite vivid, quite fresh in how it presents itself to us, provided that we're open to it. So again, many possibilities. He goes on to say the Buddha nature is twofold, that there's tenderness, which we could think of as maitri toward ourselves, friendliness toward ourselves, our ability to simply accept ourselves in the present moment without needing to change anything. Compassion toward others, openness to the world, non-aggression, all of that would relate to tenderness. And also wisdom, so tenderness and wisdom. And he says particularly wisdom that can see situations very clearly, discriminating awareness wisdom. So more and more, even in just these opening lines, we're being asked to, or being directed to what we might come to recognize in our experience about who we are, how we might experience ourselves, and how we might experience the world. He goes on to say the Buddha nature traditionally is known as Sugatagarbha, gone beyond with bliss, which we've talked about previously as a starting point. And with this, we have a little glimpse of an experience that is bright and luminous. And as we continue on the path, we begin to prolong or sustain that flash. We have potential, which is the potential for Buddhahood, and we deserve realization. So we begin to cheer up and smile. So the more we're able to recognize moment to moment our inherent wakefulness, our awareness, our tenderness, our wisdom, the more we're able to increasingly identify with that, what we've talked about before is a switch of allegiance from confusion to clarity. The more we're able to do that, the more we're able to have these experiences of brightness and luminosity, simply being present, being awake, then more and more we begin to identify in a different way with who we are or what we feel we are. And this it continues throughout the Vajrayana. There's an increasing recognition of what it means to say that our inherent nature, the essence of our mind, our true nature is fundamentally awake, fundamentally aware, fundamentally open. And that whatever obscures that, whatever covers that over, and we're talking about uncovering indestructible goodness and wakefulness, that whatever obscures that is not inherent to who we are. And for that reason, we can let go of, we can remove, we can cease to be confused by. So the next section is entitled Vajra nature, which is very much a term for this quality of mind, this type of experience, this type of recognition that's connected with the Vajrayana. So Trungpa Rinpoche says, out of the momentary experience of Sugatagarbha, we begin to develop what's known as Vajra nature. So what happens is, as we practice, we become increasingly familiar with and habituated to the possibility of waking up, the possibility of relaxing, letting go, and simply being in our awareness. And it might start, as he says, with just a flash in meditation practice, an occasional glimpse. But as we go along, as we practice regularly, we become increasingly able to rest in those experiences, and in that way they become prolonged. We're more increasingly able to sustain them. We can increasingly develop trust and confidence that this is our nature. So Vajra nature is, he says, is somewhat path-oriented, but at the same time is a glimpse of our capability. So again, we're coming to this point of being able to recognize what our possibilities are, and to develop confidence in them, to develop increasing the ability to recognize them when they do occur, and to simply relax and allow ourselves to simply be when they do occur. He says Vajra has many meanings, which it does in the Vajrayana and Buddhist traditions. It can mean overcoming obstacles, but it also allows you to receive a glimpse of something that is indestructible and pure. He says Vajra can also mean awake and precise. He uses words like precision, purity, luminosity, and clarity. These are bring the realization of Vajraness. So again, there are experiences that we have in meditation, in our lives, that are being pointed out to us as being indicative of what our true nature, what our inherent nature is. He compares it to like a photograph that's in perfect focus, so that everything is sharp, that there's a really sharp, fresh, vivid quality to our experience. And with this, we develop workability. He says out of Vajra nature, the notion of workability develops. The Tibetan word is lesu rungwa, which means action that is possible, action that is suitable, action that's appropriate. And the reason that the action is possible, suitable, and appropriate is because we're present with things as they are. We're not distracted. We're not caught up in fixed ideas. We're not approaching our experience from the point of view of a theory or some kind of any kind of preconceived notion, but we're with things exactly as they are, so that whatever action we take is skillful, appropriate, and suitable because it matches exactly with what's happening. It's because we're able to be with things just as they are without needing to overlay any kind of expectation of any type. He says there are possibilities, that workability is the proper way of working with meditation and post-meditation experiences. And this workability comes out of recognizing, trusting in, and resting in our Vajra nature, our fundamentally awake, open, clear, precise, pure mind. Whatever we experience could become worthwhile and workable, which is another aspect of the Vajrayana. In the Vajrayana, everything is workable, nothing's rejected. He also says that this leads to the idea of Samantabhadra, which this was interesting. So Samantabhadra, he translates as complete goodness. And just Samantabhadra is a Sanskrit term. It's Kunta Sangpo in Tibetan, which he translates as completely good or all good, and says basic goodness might be a rough translation of this particular state of being. And just as a little bit of background for talking about Samantabhadra, the Samantabhadra is the primordial Buddha in the Nyingma tradition, very similar to, completely, similar to the idea of Vajradhara, the primordial Buddha in the Kagyu tradition. But Samantabhadra is connected with the Ati or Dzogchen teachings. And the idea here again is that Samantabhadra is our own true nature, our own innate awareness. It's what we can identify with. That Samantabhadra is not something external alone, but is actually who we are. And to further elaborate on this, I just have one sentence that I want to read about Samantabhadra from a book by Karl Brunholz called A Lullaby to Awaken the Heart. Oh, and actually what I'm about to read is Karl's translation of part of a text by Longchenpa. Although Samantabhadra often appears to be described as a person or a realized being, usually speaking in the first person in Dzogchen Tantras, it's important to understand that the name Samantabhadra refers to nothing other than the nature of our own mind's instantaneous and irreversible recognition of itself, its own face, its own nature, its essence, before there is even a stirring of non-recognition or delusion about it. This is why Samantabhadra, like Vajradhara, represents primordial Buddhahood and represents our truest nature, who we most truly are, whether we recognize it or not. Also, I'll read that last part again. It's important to understand that the name Samantabhadra refers to nothing other than the nature of our minds, our own mind's instantaneous and irreversible recognition of itself, its own face, its own nature, essence, before there is even the stirring of non-recognition or delusion about it. So again, we're talking about recognition. We're talking about seeing that we're not talking about any kind of external entity or being, but we're talking about the true nature of our mind, and that this comes about through mind's ability to recognize itself. And this is something we encountered way back when we studied the Hinayana text. If you remember, in the chapter titled Touch and Go, Trungpa Rinpoche begins by saying, and this relates to Hinayana meditation practice, the attitude that brings about the possibility of mindfulness is mind's awareness of itself. Your mind is aware of itself, which means that you're aware that you are aware. And in meditation practice, we have this experience from moment to moment. We might misunderstand it somewhat. We might think that we create mindfulness, or that mindfulness can only happen under certain conditions. Those are misconceptions. The basic idea is our mind at any point in time, mind can recognize itself. Awareness recognizes itself, and we can open up, let go, and simply be just as we are, and be with the world just as the world is. So to continue with Samantabhadra, the state of, Trungpa Rinpoche says, the state of being of Samantabhadra, or Kunta Sangpo, is inside us and outside us at the same time. So it's a non-dual experience. It's not simply something that we have, it's something that we are, and it's bigger than any conception we might have of what it could be. It's like other things, it's said to be inexpressible. So all we can do is point to it with words that point out some aspect of it. Trungpa Rinpoche says, when we look up at the sky, we find goodness, precision, cheerfulness, and purity existing up there. When we look at the ceiling, at our rugs, at the back of the person sitting in front of us, or for our purposes tonight, at our computer screen, when we eat food, take a shower, and when we rest, we could see basic goodness there. These are expressions of Samantabhadra. So again, we're talking about something that we actually could experience and do experience, whether we recognize the significance and the fullness of that or not. But when we simply wake up, we have a glimpse, a flash of this. When we come back in meditation practice from being lost in dreams, we have a moment of recognition, a moment of clarity, a moment of something, again, that's precise, pure, luminous, clear, and cheerful. So Trungpa Rinpoche talks about 5 aspects of Samantabhadra: all good path, all good ornamentation, all good teacher, all good insight, all good realization. And doesn't really, it only says a little bit about this. I tried to see if I could flesh it out a little, but basically all good path, he says, mainly refers to post-meditation experiences. What I was able to find elsewhere is the Samantabhadra here is the experience of the ground of all phenomena or suchness. So that whatever we experience is vivid, fresh, and that this is the nature of phenomena. This is, Samantabhadra. All good ornamentation. Trungpa Rinpoche says there are a lot of attributes or ornamentations connected with the possibility of attaining the Samantabhadra state or Samantabhadra environment. But the basic attribute is that no matter what occurs in apparent phenomena, we begin to experience that there are not really any obstacles, and we begin to regard everything as a further step on the path. And this is what happens as we increasingly come to identify with, recognize, switch allegiance to our inherent wakefulness. more and more, rather than seeing things, obstacles as setbacks, we come to recognize them as opportunities to wake up, and as opportunities to go further, as opportunities to open further, as some kind of feedback or message to us that allows us to open ourselves to ourselves. Similarly, the notion of all good teacher, this type of Samantabhadra, Trungpa Rinpoche says, provides us with such clarity and precision that the phenomenal world itself becomes a teacher to us. He says the more we fall down into the mud and the confusion, the more the phenomenal world becomes our teacher. All good insight, very simply, that we see things as they are without cloudiness or problem. That the wisdom of Samantabhadra is self-arising. It doesn't come from anything else, which is exactly how, if we look at our experience of awareness, we realize it doesn't come from anything. It just always is. We're always aware of something. We may not always be aware that we're aware, but we're always aware of something. And that awareness doesn't have an origin. It doesn't have a starting point. It's traditionally what's said is that it's unborn, that it doesn't depend on any causes. It just is. And at that point, we come to realize it's unceasing, that it doesn't have a stopping point, that we're always aware of something. So this is the all good insight. And then finally, all good realization, Trungpa Rinpoche says, means not having any hesitation about situations. That even if we're confused, there's no hesitation about working with that confusion. That we're self-sufficient. We begin to perceive our day-to-day life situations are not all that different from the reality of Samantabhadra, which is all good. So obviously we're talking about a very fruitional kind of experience. Traditionally, in some teachings, it's said at this point that we develop the eyes of freedom, which again is speaking about the clarity of perception that develops when we're able to let go of fixed mind and simply be in clear seeing, superior seeing, Vipassana experience. The next section of this chapter is entitled Letting Go, where he says Vajra nature and Samantabhadra come about naturally. And the word naturally is important here because, again, it's something that we don't need to create. It's just something that we need to allow ourselves to experience, something we need to recognize, something we need to allow ourselves to tune into. Oftentimes in traditional teachings, they'll use the word contrivance as an obstacle in meditation practice because we think that we need to make something happen, or there is something we should be experiencing that's somehow different from what we are experiencing. And the idea that it can actually come about naturally means that we let go of any attempt to contrive anything, because our fundamental nature is Samantabhadra, is awake, is Vajradhara. We just simply need to trust in that and let go and relax enough to allow ourselves to experience it. He says that this experience of letting go and experiencing Samantabhadra may come about by seeing the guru, the Vajra master, but it's mainly a question of letting go. It depends on how much we preserve ourselves as samsaric people, as opposed to how much we let go. And he goes on to say, letting go is relaxation, but it's important to understand that the kind of relaxation we're talking about here is relaxing our effort to maintain ourselves, to maintain ego, to let go of any kind of effort to achieve any particular state of mind, and simply be with what is. That it's not relaxation in the sense of the kind of dullness that we might have by relaxing by watching television for hours. Not that there's anything wrong with that per se, but that's not really the kind of relaxation we're talking about here. He's talking about relaxation in the sense of letting go. Relaxing the effort of mind to preserve ego, to impose expectations and preconceptions on the world, letting go of any kind of effort. And this is, again, why the utter simplicity of meditation practice is so important to understand that we're not trying to create any particular state of mind when we meditate. We're simply trying to allow ourselves to be as we are and to allow things to be as they are. He says that this letting go can be a painful process as well. And I think it's particularly painful from the point of view of ego because it has to do with letting go of attachments and having some fearlessness, as we talked about when we studied the Shambhala text, with being willing to be without reference points, being able to be without things that make us habitually comfortable and provide a seeming kind of security. But he says at the same time it's pleasant. He says it's not a bad operation because nobody's at home and there's no home even. We're floating in space. And we can actually just jump in. So at this point, take a moment to let go of thoughts of the past, including everything I just said, and let go of thoughts about the future, anything that I might say or any questions that we might have at this point, and just simply rest into present experience, whatever that might be. Work with the breath, bringing mind and body together in one place, which is here. Just feel whatever we're feeling. Just see thoughts, feelings, and perceptions as they come and go without engaging or judging or trying to do anything with them. Simply settle. With no further effort at all. Just simply awake. Whatever experience of being present, being awake, simply being here with nothing further to do. This is what we're asked to recognize, to come to realize that this is our fundamental nature. Ungraspable, yet always present. And to continue, while this awake quality might always be here, sometimes circumstances, contrasts allow us to see it perhaps a little bit more clearly. In particular, I'm thinking of the experiences of coming back when we find ourselves distracted or absorbed in thought and suddenly realize, here I am. And we're back in awareness again. And realize that whatever it is that we're thinking, whatever we may be experiencing, that we always can come back, and that we always do come back, and that whatever state of mind we might have been in, whatever feelings we might have had, come to realize that they're all temporary, but that the awareness is already there and always there, always here. And what I'm trying to get as the indestructible quality of it. Ordinarily, I think we think of indestructible as, hard. And of course, in this case, the Vajra, the notion of diamond-like, is really referring to this, indestructible quality. And yet, at the same time, awareness is ungraspable. And when we do try to grasp it, what happens is we find that we've lost awareness. Now we're dealing with the thought of the past, and we're not in present awareness anymore when we try to grasp it, which is why Trungpa Rinpoche, when he talked about Vipassana, says the way to sustain Vipassana is by disowning. Because if we hold on to it, what we're holding on to is our concept of what it is or what it was. But we can always come back. It's always there. And in that sense, it's indestructible. He says wakefulness, this is the section titled Diamond Wakefulness. The wakefulness is very important in the Vajrayana. Vajrayana wakefulness is indestructible like a diamond, strong, powerful. It cannot be defeated, fractured, destroyed. And the more we come to understand, the more we come to see this aware quality of mind, we realize that it really can't be defeated, fractured, or destroyed. It can be covered over, and often is. We can be mistaken. We can be confused about what it is. But the nature of awareness itself never changes. It's always open, always clear, always precise. The question is whether we recognize it or not, whether we tune into it or not, whether we have confidence in it or not, whether we identify with it or not. So he says in the Vajrayana, our state of being is transformed into the highest level of shamatha mindfulness and meticulousness, and the greatest vipassana awareness put together. And along with this, your loving care for yourself, in other words, Maitri, which is so important in developing compassion for others. Your loving care for yourself, which we experience in a very simple way in meditation practice, when we're able to just simply be with our experience, with our thoughts and our feelings, and just see them without judging, see them without thinking in terms of good or bad, more or less judgment of any kind. Just that fundamental level of loving care for ourselves in the moment. Your loving care for yourself and the greatest caring for others are put together, which allows us to perceive a greater world altogether. And he says this isn't an ego trip. You have to give up a lot to become a Vajra-like person. We have to develop mindfulness, awareness, softness, and gentleness. And he compares it actually to the process of making a diamond. And what this means is that we can't be hampered or influenced by any form of klesha. We're free from the kleshas because of our devotion to the Vajra master or guru and our intense practice. And he goes further to say we have to understand indivisibility or non-duality and egolessness. We become self-contained at this point in our practice. He says we might not want to be a diamond sometimes. But if we look at Hinayana discipline, we see that it already has a diamond-like quality. So this is what I meant earlier when I said that at a point in this chapter, he talks about the simplicity of the Hinayana and along with the simplicity of the Vajrayana. We see that if we look at Hinayana discipline, we see that it has a diamond-like quality already. In the Hinayana, we're trying to work with specks of dust and dirt to overcome any dirt. Everything is crystal clear, pure, precise, on the spot. Because of that diamond-like quality, the Hinayana would be the best ground from which to hear the Vajrayana. And what is this ground that he's talking about? It's simply being here, simply being with our experience and being with ourselves just as we are. It's nothing more complicated than that. But the Hinayana, he says, is coming up from below, which would be difficult to maintain. The Vajrayana is like a diamond ceiling coming down from above, or like a diamond umbrella. So there's a quality of confidence in Vajrayana realization. I actually looked this up in the original seminary transcript that part of this chapter came from. And what he's talking about here is something else that we've talked about in other chapters, that in the Vajrayana, we take the fruition as the path. That's what he means by the ceiling coming down. That we're not working towards something we haven't experienced, but we're coming to recognize something we do experience, and then that becomes our path. That's why he earlier in the chapter talked about the flashes of Buddha nature, flashes of bodhicitta, flashes of luminosity and clarity, precision and awareness, that becomes what we work with in the Vajrayana. The first we come to see that we have these experiences, even if just for a moment. And then we work further toward that. He says to study the Vajrayana, our mind has to be clear and precise. We have to be very disciplined. He says if we don't get involved in the discipline, we tend to dream about the colorfulness of the Vajrayana and become clouded over and more confused. So if we want to hear the Vajrayana properly, he says a good suggestion is to go back to square one, when we first encountered the Dharma. He says we should maintain our Hinayana style of practice as if we were a newcomer. We can't bypass our Hinayana training. So it's not that we stop practicing at any point. The next section is on the siddhas and the varieties of tantric lifestyles. And what I'd like to do before talking about this chapter is read a little excerpt of from a different book where a student of Trungpa Rinpoche describes his an experience that he had with Trungpa Rinpoche. Because I think it relates directly to this section on the siddhas and the varieties of tantric lifestyles. So this is Michael Carroll, who wrote a book called Awake at Work. And he's describing, again, his experience of Trungpa Rinpoche. In 1980, at the age of 26, I set aside my worldly ambitions and cashed in all my savings to attend a Buddhist seminary in Alberta, Canada, led by the renowned Tibetan meditation master, Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche. In seminary, we sat in meditation for 7 to 8 hours a day, studied Tibetan and Indian texts, and discussed timeless Buddhist teachings among ourselves and with Rinpoche. The training was rigorous and thorough, and the time spent in these long, regal stretches of the Canadian Rockies was delightful. For me, a young, enthusiastic spiritual seeker, I felt that I had arrived at the inner sanctum. I was living the cloistered life, studying ancient teachings with a renowned master. Surely this was as momentous as life could get. I had left behind the world of materialism, and I was studying meditation techniques that would lead me to wisdom and bliss. However, despite my lofty ambitions, I was soon to discover that I was being trained for something much more practical and profound. As the weeks passed, I decided with firm conviction that I wanted to devote myself to spiritual study and meditation for the rest of my life. I contemplated details of such a venture. Where would I live? How would I pay the bills? What bills would I even have? Could I wander from place to place, or should I find a monastery to take me in? How would my girlfriend feel about my living the life of a monk? She'd probably be relieved, I thought. It was all very exciting. I was convinced I was making the right choice. Toward the end of seminary, I requested a meeting with Rinpoche, and I planned to let him know my intentions. One could never be quite certain what he would say, but I was pretty sure that he would give me advice on how to proceed. Maybe he would suggest that I join a monastery or direct me to go on an extended meditation retreat. Maybe he would see my true potential and send me to Sikkim to study at the feet of the Karmapa, one of the most revered teachers of Tibetan Buddhism. As seminary drew to a close, we all gathered for a graduation celebration. Rinpoche joined us for the festivities and took a seat at the far end of the large, spacious ballroom. That evening, the sadness of the many farewells, the budding Canadian spring, and the graduation party were mingling into a perfect ending to a truly defining time in my life, when a young man said to me, "Rinpoche will see you now." Now, I thought, in the middle of a party? I finally had my chance to speak with him, but I didn't feel prepared. I was escorted to Rinpoche, and after the customary bow, and then the typical silent, awkward moments, I began to explain my plans to become a full-time meditator. He patiently listened to my reasoning, smiling, nodding his head, and studying my face. I explained to him that I had left my job, given up my home, and cashed in my savings to come to seminary. I was devoted to getting to the heart of the teachings, committed to meditation, and prepared to spend the rest of my life focused exclusively on the Buddhist path. Now I just needed a little advice, a tip or two. So I asked, how should I proceed? "Go home and get a job," he replied instantly. I stammered and tried to get away and tried to get my footing. My mind was racing. Maybe he thinks I'm not good enough to be a monk, or maybe he thinks I'm someone else. That's not unusual with so many students. He could make a mistake like that. I grabbed for a storyline, any storyline. I did not expect him to tell me to get lost or to go get a job. Then I thought, maybe I haven't been clear. Maybe he misunderstood me. I got control of myself and repeated my rationale once again. And again, Rinpoche patiently listened to my reasoning, sipping from his glass and sitting solidly in his chair. Finally, he sat back and with a wide, mischievous grin said, "You can do it. Give it a try." The interview was over and my monastic career was on the rocks. The tables had been turned and I was in many respects out in the cold. So that was his experience with Trungpa Rinpoche. And I know other people had very similar experiences where they would talk about their grand plans. He said, you should get a job. You should engage in ordinary life. This is what we'll be talking about now in this section, siddhas, varieties of tantric lifestyles. So he says in the Vajrayana, there are endless possibilities in terms of lifestyles and livelihood. And I think the one point in this is that we don't have to fixate on any one set of circumstances, that everything and anything can be the path in Vajrayana, everything and anything. He says that there are 84 Mahasiddhas and that these were many types of people and who had many different kinds of occupations, that there were kings, ascetics, drunkards, scholars, intellectuals, craftsmen, farmers, ascetics, all kinds of people. The 84 Mahasiddhas are really, if you were to look at a listing of who they were and what they did, very, very, very different. But he says in Tantra, this is the important thing, there's a quality of intelligence that lets us relate with the phenomenal world directly and simply. We engage in Buddhist practice to work with our mental fixations. Like the siddhas, we can use whatever lifestyle we have as practice and discipline. We can actually use whatever lifestyle we have as practice and discipline. What he says, whatever we do, because of our tantric involvement, has brought us into this particular situation. And because we see that it is our practice, we learn enormously from it. But we are able to work with any situation, that it's a fixation to think that only under certain circumstances can we wake up, that only under certain circumstances the things become workable. And the fact with the Vajrayana, we can work with any situation. He says everything is a commitment. The whole thing is our practice. Otherwise, how would our actions be different from the ordinary aggression and passion that takes place all over the universe? And he says, once people are more realized, and we're not talking about full realization, but more realized, once people are more realized, they tend to retire from the world. However, there is a need for familiarity with samsara, and according to the samsaric world, we have to relate with a trade and a profession. That cities don't necessarily want to be henchmen or pimps or whatever they were, but were encouraged to do so as their practice. He said in some ways it was more of a pain in the neck than pleasurable. But for tantric students, whether they are good calligraphers or good draftspersons, whatever they might be doing, they're actually connecting with the world. And at that instant, when we're actually able to connect with the world, there's some link to what we might eventually be in terms of attaining spiritual power or siddhi. And to do this, he says, we have to stick with it. So again, we're talking about the importance of discipline. We need to have strength and perseverance to do it properly in an enlightened way so that we actually can help people rather than harming them. The siddhis of the past, these Mahasiddhas, lived in the world in an ordinary way, but still found time to engage in Vajrayana practice as well. And he says this isn't so different from what we might do, that it might be a hassle and pain, but the fact that we have any kind of physical or psychological pain is a sign of stimulation or circulation, a sign that our metabolism is functioning properly. And he closes by saying the inspiration in Tantra comes from a vaster sense of things, larger or smaller. There's no point, no expectations. He says things begin to open and close simultaneously. They get big and wide and spacious at the same time as they get minute and tiny. That kind of pulsation goes on all the time in our lives. And that as long as we don't label it as depression or excitement, when we have a minute experience, it's the largest vision we could ever have. And when we have the largest experience we ever have, it's microcosmic. Again, so long as we don't label it as depression or excitement. In other words, as long as we can just be with things as they are. So when we're able to do that, as he says, we can't miss the boat because the boat is always there. So that's what I came prepared to say tonight. John might want to add something and then we could have some discussion.
No, I have nothing to add. That was terrific. We got to have discussion. Thank you, Michael.
Then we have discussion.
I will add this. Listen, there are books about the 84 Mahasiddhas, and I think you might enjoy their stories. Some of them are really outrageous, like the Rip Van Winkle fellow who went to sleep at a crossroads in the middle of a city, slept for I forget how many, 17 years, and woke up enlightened. Or the fellow who was so obese that he couldn't stand up, and his family got tired of having him around and having to feed him all the time. So they carted him out to a charnel ground. A charnel ground, in India, when people died, if you didn't have enough money to have them cremated, you just took their bodies out and left them in a charnel ground, it was called, and animals would come and eat the corpses. And so they left this obese fellow in the charnel ground, and there was a yogi meditating there, because yogis would go to these places because they were full of death, and so they were an inspiration to tread the path and meditate. And this yogi took pity on the guy, gave him teachings. The guy got enlightened. Students came, gave him food, and took teachings, and he never did get up. He spent the rest of his life lying down in that charnel ground. So some of these stories are just, the 84 Siddhas are just really outrageous and fun. And you can read them. So that's all I have to say.
Lane?
I have two questions for you, and I'll ask the easy one first.
Thank you.
What's the difference between Samantabhadra and Tathagata? It sounds like they sound like the same thing to me.
I think they are in one sense, they are the same. I mean, it kind of goes back to, there's Tathagata is usually along the lines of, in terms of the path, more of an what Trungpa Rinpoche called like an embryonic understanding of our Buddha nature. So that it's, kind of the womb or essence of Buddha, as opposed to with Vajrayana or Samantabhadra or Vajradhara for that matter, fully realized Buddhahood. So that it's not embryonic or like essence, have that kind of experience, that fundamentally is who we are. The problem is we don't identify with that. We identify with ego, we identify with confusion, so that it's greatly covered over. But at any point with, in particular with Samantabhadra, it's a notion of primordial Buddha, first thing. And the idea is that from that primordial Buddha experience, primordial awake experience, think of it that way, because I think the problem with Samantabhadra is a little too easy to think of it as something external, although it's also our experience of the world. But that from that, we either recognize that's who we are, in which case, or we fail to recognize. And when we fail to recognize, then we, slip into habitual patterns, the biggest one being the belief in ego and I and other and all of that. But
Yeah, that makes sense. So,
And
but the man.
just add this.
Did you have something to add, John?
Yeah, these two concepts are picturing a different thing. Samantabhadra is an external image of a Buddha, and you could see an image of him on a shrine, and he represents enlightened mind, which we all have. Tathagata Garbha, you don't see an image of it, because Garbha means womb or essence of the Tathagatas, those who have gone beyond. And what it's referring to is our inner potential, our inner enlightened nature that is covered over by confusion. And so you wouldn't see, I've never seen an image of Tathagata Garbha on a shrine anywhere, but you would see Samantabhadra or Vajradhara. So they're just coming at it from different angles.
Oh, okay. That's the way I was kind of understanding Samantabhadra, that basic goodness is something inherent in us, that it's something within, like Tathagata Garbha. That's why I couldn't quite understand the difference.
It is. But there you can find a tanka or a statue of Samantabhadra. I've never seen a tanka or a statue, an image of Tathagata Garbha. Have you, Michael?
Never. No.
Yeah. It's just
another way to think of it is, oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Let's just say that I think I talked about this once before, that sometimes the teachings are divided up into teachings that are provisional and teachings that are definitive. And the idea of a provisional teaching is it's teachings that we're able, that are the Buddha or later teachers presented because they're things that we can understand. It doesn't mean that they're not true, but that, there may be partial or, so for instance, I think the easiest example to think of is one of the Buddha's first teachings was about impermanence, the fact that, anything that's compounded will come apart, that things are impermanent, because we can kind of see impermanence in the world around us, whether we like it or not. But if you develop a deeper understanding of impermanence, it's also a way to understand emptiness, which is not as easy a concept to grasp. So emptiness is not completely definitive, but it's getting there. It's getting more to, a definitive or ultimate teaching. So I think you could think of Tathagata Garbha as a provisional teaching that's pointing at what Samantabhadra is. But in the beginning, we experience it in just these flashes or glimpses. So it does seem like it's essence, and that there's, but at some point is when we identify more fully with our true nature, it's more of an experience of something, more Samantabhadra-like. But it's not that Tathagata, I don't know if that helps at all, but it's like the Tathagata Garbha is pointing at that, whereas Samantabhadra is, very clear, direct statement of what our true nature is. And yeah, as a visual representation, can function as a reminder of that.
The example you gave of impermanence kind of relates to my other question, that doesn't the idea of instructability contradict the idea of impermanence and the idea of no self?
That's that's actually a very interesting question. And part of that, you get this, I'm a little more familiar with Mahamudra teachings than Maha Ati teachings, but basically the idea is that the more we look at the nature of awareness or the nature of mind, the essence of mind, it's because it's ungraspable in any way. You can't say that there's any self to it because there's nothing you can say it actually is. But you can't say that it's not there because, you know, we obviously experience awareness. But so that it's continuous, but at the same time, it's ever, you know, it's like the line in the chant, nothing whatever, but everything arises from it. So there's not a self in the sense of any kind of entity that you can point to or grasp or identify.
I don't know though, like in my deepest Vipassana states, like I felt like no fear of death. Like do you know what I mean? Like it felt like this is eternal.
It's eternal, but what is it?
I don't know. The best I could come to is that there's some kind of paradox going on there that I don't quite grasp. Because both seem to be true, you know. I mean, obviously this life is going to end, right? But if my awareness is eternal, it has to go through some kind of transformation, I suppose.
I think it's one of those things where, like the quote that I read from Trungpa Rinpoche in the beginning, it's not the conclusion that's important, it's more the seeing. It's more the experiencing, that's really what's significant.
Also, I think it's kind of significant not really having an answer, just like being open with it.
Yeah.
I think you also have to realize that at different stages of the path, things are said which can be completely conflicting. So, for instance, at the beginning stage of the path, people come thinking that there must be something eternal and unchanging. And the Buddha taught that there is nothing that is eternal and unchanging. He taught the truth of impermanence, 3 marks of existence: impermanence, suffering, and egolessness. At the middle stage of the path, we're taught that there is nothing that exists to either disappear or survive, that the whole idea of existence is a mistake. It's not that things don't exist, but they don't exist. In fact, there's a famous statement, it's called the Tetralemma, 4-limbed statement, and it says things neither exist, nor do they not exist, nor do they both exist and not exist, nor do they neither exist or not exist. It's out the window, the whole issue, see, at the Mahayana stage of the path. So at each stage of the path, these conceptual systems have a particular use for us to wake us up because we've clung to something. And they can often be conflicting. And they say that the Buddha spoke in 84,000 tongues. And what that means is that he said what was useful to the people who were listening to awaken them, whatever it was. And just to confuse things a little more, he even, at one point, taught that ego does exist. There's a school of Buddhists who were called the Pudgalavadins, who were, their central theme was that ego exists, very small. And you don't hear much about them. So he said whatever was useful to people to awaken them to reality.
So I had a request to read again, the quote from Carl Brunholz's book about Samantabhadra, so I'll do that. Although Samantabhadra often appears to be described as a person or a realized being, usually speaking in the first person in Dzogchen Tantras, it's important to understand that the name Samantabhadra refers to nothing other than the nature of our own mind's instantaneous and irreversible recognition of itself, its own face, its own nature, before there's even a stirring of non-recognition or delusion about it.
You like that, Shinyi?
Yes, I'm the requester. Well, since I requested.
I wasn't going to out you, but since you did.
What does the last fragment of the sentence mean? Not disturbed by none something.
Before there's even stirring of non-recognition. That goes along, I think, with the my understanding, at least, of this part of the Dzogchen teachings, that the idea is, again, our fundamental nature, I can't even say first thought, before even first thought, is exactly this. And then what happens is we either recognize our nature. In other words, we are our nature, basically, you could say. Maybe recognize is even the best word, because even that implies some kind of duality. We are our nature, or we fail to recognize, and then we get caught in duality. So that's what happens. Our ordinary conventional experience is that there's non-recognition and delusion. So Samantabhadra is before that happens, kind of right at the very, first moment, first microsecond of experience, before there's even a stirring of non-recognition or delusion about it. Or again, another way to look at it is the non-recognition and delusion, the stirring of non-recognition or delusion. That's the covering over. That's what we uncover through our meditation practice. That'd be another way to look at it.
Thank you. Like that quote.
Yeah, it's simple and difficult at the same time. Danielle?
Hi. When you said there was a sect that believes in the ego, even if it's just a small smidge, that kind of shocked me. And I was just like, how you say always to question beliefs, not to have any beliefs. So if these people believe in an ego and the other sects don't believe in an ego, what am I to believe,
You follow the tradition that makes sense to you, and the Pudgalavadins have disappeared long ago. They're myth practically at this point. But I think they are referenced just to show that the Buddha would say whatever would wake people up. And for some small group of people, that's what would wake them up. Because you see, in Buddhism, there is no holy writ. There is no one way to describe it. Words are just meant to be useful ways to take things. That's it. There is no canonized, true set of words. So there's no corollary to the Bible or the Quran in Buddhism. All the texts, and a lot of the texts conflict. There are so many teachings, and they can conflict with each other sometimes, definitely, especially at different levels of the path. So that's all that's pointing out. You don't have to go figure out how he meant that.
I understand. Thank you.
Yeah.
I understand.
That's really the amazing thing about Buddhism. It's not really a religion in the sense that we understand religions. Religions are belief systems that mean to describe reality. Buddhism, has no holy writ. It has no canonized word. It's just meant to be, as a great Buddhist scholar said, the words are relative truth, which means a useful way to take things. useful to your path. I always tell this story about the Trungpa Rinpoche, so stop me if you've heard this one, but that when I first met him and didn't know much about him, was at what's now called Karmi Churling, used to be called Tail of the Tiger, up in Vermont. And these people came down from the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation to interview the exotic Tibetan Lama, a couple of hippies in bell-bottom pants and long hair and beards. And one guy had a shoulder-mounted camera and was filming him, and the other guy had a tape deck, a reel-to-reel tape deck slung around his shoulders and a microphone in hand. The only question I remember him asking, because it shocked me so, was I didn't know nothing about him, was he said, Trungpa Rinpoche, as a Buddhist, what do you believe in? And Rinpoche answered, as a Buddhist, I don't believe in anything. Perfect.
Yeah.
Buddhist.
Wouldn't you say that there's a belief in Buddha nature? Doesn't that count as a belief?
Mm-mm.
Well, there's a presentation of it, but ultimately what's important is that we have to experience it.
Yeah,
And-
not believing it.
Yeah, the belief doesn't help. It's the experience that's important. That's one of the criticisms of conceptual mind. If you go into some of the real philosophical things, that one of the problems with with conceptual mind is that we tend to mistake the concept for the experience. And conceptual mind can be helpful in pointing us towards something, but if we mistake the idea of it for the thing, then we're missing the point too.
Yeah, concepts like Buddha nature are just sort of pointers, and we're being enjoined to come back out of concept into our own experience and discover what's there. And these are suggestions about what we might discover. But if you cling to them as beliefs, then you go off on the wrong track altogether. Then you head into confusion of all kinds. You become a believer. And Buddhism is not about that. Buddhism is about being awake, responsive, accurate, open-hearted, clear, intelligent, not clouded over by belief at all.
From what I understand, Buddha said, don't believe anything I say, I'll put everything to the test. And I think that's where Trungpa was coming from.
That's part of it, yeah, for sure. We have to test everything ourselves and experience it truly.
So we don't believe in experiencing it truly?
It's a useful way to take things. That's what all these descriptions are. And how would you believe in experiencing something truly? What does it even mean? You know?
Might mean that that's what you're looking for.
I think we're being enjoined to examine our experience and come back out of concept ideas which cloud it over. Concepts of all kinds are like clouds on our experience.
Or maybe putting it a different way. Yeah, I think from the Buddha's point of view, or any teacher's point of view, we are Buddha nature. We are Buddha nature, but believing that doesn't do us any good. We actually have to experience it. And in fact, if we believe in it, then we have some idea about what it is, which almost guarantees that that's not what it is.
Right.
Because it's, some concept we have about it. And it's even that simple in meditation practice. It's why one of the first things when I first learned to meditate, was told that when we do meditation, we're not trying to create any particular state of mind. Because if we think that the purpose of meditation is to make us be a certain way, calmer or whatever, and that's not what we're experiencing, then we're going to struggle with ourselves. And the essence of shamatha is non-struggle. It's not a question of trying to create any kind of experience, or create any kind of experience. Or if you read a lot of the traditional teachings, they'll talk about it as contrivance, that we're trying to crank something up, make something happen. And that's the danger in belief, is that, we end up, rather than experiencing things as they are, we experience what we believe, which, often have the experience that we think something's true and find out that it isn't.
I mean, it's like you wouldn't say, I believe I'm sitting at this desk looking at my computer screen. To say you believe it is almost, it's really screwed up. It's an extra layer, because we know we're right here at the desk. For me, it's a desk, looking at a computer screen, seeing all these images. It's patently obvious, and to say I believe it. So that's really the relationship between the truths that Buddhism is trying to wake us up to and the words. They're pointers. Oftentimes the Buddha said conflicting things because it was useful for one person and not another. Sorry. Go ahead.
Mark had his hand raised. That's all.
I don't know. I think it all just comes back to, the path we're on it looks like a circle to me. Like we start someplace and then we go around and we end up coming back to the same place we're at, in that it's all about the moment. It's all about meditation. It's all about experiencing something that's really amazing. And that is everything that exists in the moment or doesn't exist in the moment, but it's something that's so precious that we all take part in our own way. And it's wonderful and exciting, and without stress and anxiety. And I think that last chapter, the last paragraph was very, it was kind of significant for me. Talking about neurotic thought, but that you have to leave everything. Everything in the moment is fine. Just that's what it is. It's always in the moment. And it's something just to experience and be part of, and maybe not define, just be part of it.
I think you're right. It is kind of a circle. It reminds me of T.S. Eliot's poem, "Come to this place and know it for the very first time."
Without preconceived notions. Uh-oh, I think that's kind of maybe I'm stepping back and starting to define it. Anyway. Just enjoy the ride.
Almost 9 o'clock.
Perhaps we should end.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll put the chants up. Xinyi is going to lead us. We'll mute all. And we'll have a discussion, continue this discussion tomorrow. Hope I can find the chants. Here we go.
We'll close by chanting a
Xinyi, I had to mute you. Sorry.
We'll close by chanting a prayer for peace, and then dedicate the merit to the benefit of all sentient beings. By the blessings of enlightened and compassionate ones, by the power of my positive actions of 3 times and my prayers of pure aspiration, may wars, conflicts, epidemics, and all other maladies itself in this world, and may the earth and all who live on this earth enjoy the abundance of well-being. May all learn to live lovingly with each other. By this merit, may all obtain your missions. May you defeat the enemy wrongdoing. From stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara, may I free all beings. By the confidence of the golden sun of the great east, may the lotus garden of the victim's wisdom bloom. May the dark ignorance of sentient beings be dispelled. May all beings enjoy profound, brilliant glory.
Thanks, John. Thanks, Michael. Thanks, Jenny.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Michael.
Great to see
Thanks,
you all.
everybody. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Good night.
Thank you.
You well,
Good
everyone.
night.
Good night, everyone.